Does anyone have any questions about like anything else about how this goes?
Do I need to have had watched Kratos versus Asura before the podcast?
Oh no! Oh.
You're one of those people? God damn it. Hey, what's going on, you guys, and welcome back to That's a Wrap. My name is the Raptor, and today we are discussing the epic crossover of God of Lore versus Asura's Fans' Wrath. But before we get to that, let's introduce the guests that we have today. First up, we have Zero, again, somehow. I think this is like your third time on the show. How are you doing, Zero?
Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is Zero, and welcome back to That's a Wrap.
Fucking hell, dude.
Today we're going to be talking about Kratos versus Asura, Lore Man versus Feats Man. And today I'm joined by other people. Let's take a gander over at Dr. Fiction. How are you doing today?
Hey guys, I am lacking the energy to do anything cool right now, but howdy, I am happy to be here. I realize I am still in my Christmas outfit, just like I was last year, but at this point, I don't care.
Don't worry, half of us are in Christmas outfits if you look at the screen, so we're all good. Can I get back to hosting now, Zero? Is that okay with you?
No.
No? Okay, well, I'm gonna do it anyway. So both
Fuck
Zero
you.
and Fiction are two of our lovely mods, so it's great that they're here. And one of our members, one of our many, many members of the Discord, link in the description, by the way, we have Santee as well. How are you doing?
Hey, it's your boy, it's Andy Sherm. It's great to be here. Although I do take offense to Fiction's look because I'm literally Santee themed. Like, that's part of my brand. Fiction just hasn't changed for 3 months.
That's right, these probably smell horrible.
Okay, that's great. Thank you guys so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. And everyone who's listening, yeah, the podcast is back. I'm super excited to be doing this again. We are going to be reviewing Death Battle episodes as they come out. That's basically like the main thing that we are trying to do. So obviously the one that just came out is Kratos versus Asura. I'm sure we have a lot of different opinions to say about this one, but that's the point, right? You know, that's what makes it interesting. And I'm not going to be a stickler for trying to make it, you know, an hour long or anything. We're just going to keep it to the relevant stuff. If we end up going off topic a few times, I think that's perfectly fine, but, you know, not trying to force it. Oh, Fiction just changed his profile.
Wow!
There we
Peer
go.
pressure is successful.
Finally.
Thank you, Fiction. Now we just have one Santa Claus here. But yeah, we're just gonna keep it to the stuff that we want to talk about. Not make it too quick, not make it too long. You know, just the stuff that we want to say. So yeah, are you guys ready to get started talking about this episode?
No.
I definitely got a lot to say.
Right, I'm sure you do. Yeah, you're the big you're the big fan of these characters out of the four of us, I assume.
I love God of War. It's one of my favorite franchises. Kratos is one of my favorite characters of anything ever, really. Asura is not as high in my top list, but Asura's Wrath is probably like a top 50 game for me. It is pretty sweet. I never finished it, but it is very fun.
Okay, great. Yeah, great to hear. So yeah, great to have you on the podcast then. So yeah, I guess talking about this episode. So this episode was more controversial in more ways than I expected. I expected it to be controversial from an analysis point of view. Because of course, yes, there's the whole lore versus feats. What do we include? And, you know, everyone's heard me talk about what I think is fair to include well enough, but I'll probably get more into that later in the episode. But I expected that to be controversial. I did not expect the production to be that controversial. But it seems like there are a lot of people who disagree on whether or not this episode and the animation was well made. So I'm curious as to your thoughts. And we'll kind of just go one by one. So Zero, we'll start with you. Just generally speaking, how did you find this episode, just like production-wise?
As per usual, Death Battle knocks it out of the park with the analysis portions. Like, the editing on them, like, I don't know how they managed to do it, but it's gotten better after they cut ties with Rooster Teeth. I don't know how that happened, but you know what? I'm not complaining at all. The analyses are really well edited, and I think that they explained the details enough for me to understand, because I'm not really that far into the God of War like lore, and I really want to play Asura's Wrath at some point. But the animation, in my opinion, it had Reggie Gigas' slow start. You see, like, Asura in the doorway of this, you know, little hut that Kratos is chilling in for whatever reason.
Right.
And, you know, there's flames behind Asura and shit. There's, like, a lot going on. And then out of nowhere, he's teleported to this temple place. Like, I'm not that familiar with either character, so like I'm not sure if this is something that usually happens in like Asura's Wrath or God of War. It made me a little lost for a second, like what's happening now?
I understand that. I think it was supposed to be like a dramatic build-up of, of a start, because it is quite a long start before you, get started with the actual fight. So I think it was supposed to be more dramatic, kind of like some mystery to it. And this is something I'm definitely going to get into a little more later, but what I've noticed is that Death Battle fans don't typically tend to react well to stuff like that. If something is not, the status quo for Death Battle, if it's not something they usually do, then there tends to be more negative feedback for that. And I think that's a double-edged sword. I think sometimes that is justified, and sometimes it's like, well, maybe like allow them to do some other things here and there. But I totally get that, yeah. And as far as the editing goes, I think you can mainly thank, DJ and Max. I don't know who specifically edited this one. I think it might have been DJ, but those two, yeah, they are amazing editors. And I
shout out to my boy DJ.
Right, yeah. I do definitely think they elevate the analyses to the next level just from the editing alone. Fiction, how about you? What did you think about the episode just overall?
Overall, I really, really liked it. I loved the analyses. Kratos didn't go in quite the direction I thought they would, but I still think they paid good respect to the character and his story. I love Kratos. I love his story. I really love a good redemption and atonement arc.
Okay.
Asura, it was pretty cool to see him because he's a character who on the internet you see, oh, he's hyped up. He's Asura. He could eat Death Stars for breakfast with an egg and bagel sandwich.
Right.
And it was cool to see where all that comes from. And you really do get the sense the Death Battle nailed emphasizing how strong he is in his own game, just like his own game did. As for the fight, it did start off kind of slow, but for me, that was okay. It was clear they were trying to tell a story. I was a little disappointed it didn't start at Kratos' house, like DevilArtemis was teasing, because I thought that would have been cool if they did like how it was in God of War PS4, where Baldur comes in and they fight. But I still liked the story that was told, and overall the fight, it looked pretty jank sometimes, but that's just how DevilArtemis makes stuff.
Yeah, I noticed that, yeah, some people were complaining about the jank, but I'm like, this still feels pretty in line with like with what DevilArtemis usually does, and I'm not trying to like knock DevilArtemis for that or anything, but it didn't seem that different from just what we had seen from him before, and it never really bothered me that much before, but I'll get to my thoughts after you guys are done. Santee, how about you? What'd you think about the episode?
I thought this was almost a peak episode.
Interesting.
I feel like if you were to look at it as like an outline, like all the individual components would lead to like another like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 like they've been bumping out lately. But there's just like a lot of very small missteps and nitpicks that kind of just make it overall like kind of just like a fine episode.
Okay, interesting.
Like it's definitely not bad. Like I want to get that out the gate. Like I think like it's probably like a 7 out of 10. Like it's cool.
Do you have like an example of a nitpick, like maybe like the first one or the biggest one that comes to mind that you want to share?
That's what makes it tricky. Is this a lot of small stuff that cascades into a big issue. I guess like to just kind of talk about the beginning a little bit. I actually did really like the beginning of the fight. That's one of the better parts of it, in my opinion. I thought from the very beginning of the animation up until where Kratos blocks the first hit with his shield is really well animated, looks great. I really like the build-up, I like the voice acting. All of it's pretty good. The teleportation isn't really explained, but I think that in specific doesn't really need to be explained. It's not a usual thing, but it's also not completely unheard of either, so it's just kind of like, that could happen, and I imagine Kratos would just figure that out in like an hour of whatever story he's in right now. To talk about the analysis and the conclusion, I think it was almost perfect, and the setup of how they were talking about it was almost perfect. I think maybe one of the minor nitpicks was like the actual visuals they chose to show whenever they were talking about stuff. When they would talk about scaling to characters like Helios and Kronos, they would use really cool scenes with Helios and Kronos doing like the attacks that they were talking about, but they were showing it in a way that almost made it seem like that actual scene itself was the feat, when that's not the feat. So it just kind of makes it a little confusing to someone that isn't like a lore expert in God of War already. Like,
so
if you're just taking it at Death Battle's word, it could be a little confusing.
So you think that they should have prioritized like clarity and consistency of what they were saying rather than the visual that looked the coolest, I guess.
To a certain degree, yeah, but I don't even think like you really have to sacrifice coolness all that much. You just have to like, because there's a lot of cool scenes. Like God of War is basically like entirely composed of cool cinematics.
Yeah, for my basic thoughts on this episode, I will say that I think when I was first watching it, I was a little over enthusiastic. Sometimes it's difficult for me to fully articulate what I'm trying to say or fully absorb everything that's happening when I'm trying to record a reaction video, because there's just a lot of things I gotta focus on. And that's why I'm happy we're doing stuff like this, because it allows me to think on things more and I can talk about what I think about an episode aside from just my literal initial reactions, you know? So I do think I was a little over enthusiastic. I would not say that this episode is amazing or anything like that, but I think the people who say that like it's bad, or the people who even just say that like it's I don't know, I really don't see that. I think there are some people who latch on to very specific nitpicks or very specific things that they don't like, and it really, that overshadows it for them, that the stuff that they don't like kind of gets in the way of the stuff that is good, because I do think there is a lot of good in this episode, but I definitely could see this being one of those episodes where someone is going to be annoyed by a decision that they made or how they decided to phrase something or analyze something, and for some people that's a really big part of it. So I can understand, you know, that there's a lot of controversy. Again, though, as far as the fight goes, even after watching the fight, like, yes, there was definitely some jank. There were definitely some slow moments. I think it could have been paced better, because on the one hand, I want to say, well, you can't expect perfect pacing with such a long animation, but we have had animations that are around this long before, like Iron Man versus Lex Luthor or something, and they do not have that issue. Like, they are not badly paced. So to say that, you know, oh, well, it's gonna be badly paced, I don't really think that's fair. I do think it could have been better paced. I do think, you know, there was some jankiness, but I also think there were other moments in the animation that were the exact opposite. And again, it seems like there are people who are latching on to the worst parts of the fight. Like, they look at the stuff that's not as good and they don't really factor in the stuff that is good. And again, you know, if that really does ruin it for you, then I'm sorry that it ruins it for you. But I like to try to factor in, you know, everything into my reviews and into my assessments of episodes. But I don't know, that's just me. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about like the analyses and the conclusion, like the stuff that they decided to say, because obviously, again, lore versus feats. I don't know if anyone has a major opinion on this, but it's very clear that they decided to go with lore. Well, lore and feats. They decided to look at everything that was official to the characters. Does anyone here, I guess we'll start with Zero, but does anyone here have a specific opinion on what should be used with lore, or how should it be handled, or should it even be handled at all? Zero, what do you think?
In my personal opinion, like, the show's like big slogan is their weapons, armor, and skills, you know, and I think in order to account for like for all of their skills, weapons, armor, stuff like that, you gotta give them like kind of just everything. It just makes sense to me to use the lore, because, you know, if that happened in line with the story, with the character's story, and that character was able to, you know, scale to such a lore feat, I don't have a problem with it. Like, I mean, sure, I would obviously prefer it if it was on screen, and so for that reason, I'm a little bit shaky on doing it, but I'm not gonna knock it, you know? I'm not gonna knock it down just for the sake of, oh, we didn't actually see it, it's just lore.
Okay, because there are definitely some people who would do that. There are some people who have a very specific aversion to lore, and they say like, oh, if it didn't happen on screen, or if it didn't happen, you know, if we don't see it happen, then, you know, it just didn't happen. So I guess everything that happened in a book does not happen. I guess that's how they see that. But anyway,
yeah,
I will get to that in a second when I talk about my opinions on that. But Fiction, do you have a specific opinion on whether or not lore should be used in a versus debate?
Oh, absolutely. Lore is backstory, and backstory has the word story in it, which means it's part of the fucking story.
I mean, you're a big Souls fan and all that, so I had a feeling that's probably where you would lean.
Yeah, it happened. We don't see it happen, but we can't see everything unless you want 10,000 God of War games before God of War 1. We know the primordial beings fought each other in the Hunger Games. Kronos killed the shit out of them, and we know Zeus killed the shit out of him, and Kratos killed the shit out of Zeus.
Whoa.
It's a very clear line that stems from lore that is very important to the God of War story.
But fiction, Kronos had a mountain on his back, so that means he's only mountain level at the time that Kratos fought him, which is an actual argument I've seen people use.
No,
he was clearly weakened to mountain level.
You're wrong. His name is Kronos. Chrono is often used to describe time, which you use a clock to tell the time. Therefore, Kronos is only clock level.
Gosh, I thought you were gonna say he's like he carried time on his back and therefore he's like hyperversal or something. I thought that's where you were
No, he's
going.
only clock level. My clock can do that. Do you expect me to believe that that is a boundless construct hanging on my wall?
To be fair,
Hell
yeah.
no, I can beat the shit out of that.
Santee, how about you? What do you think about all this lore scaling and all that?
So I have been perusing the Reddits. A very
boy.
dangerous
Oh, God.
thing to do.
Oh, and you're still alive.
And
How are you not dead?
I've lived to tell the tale.
Okay.
And I've come away with a conclusion after some thoughts. I think the term lore scaling is stupid.
Okay.
And is meant to divide up the story into arbitrary ways to scale a character that really doesn't make sense out of saying a certain character is not as strong as you think he is. Like, how many characters have you genuinely used the term lore scaling for besides, like, Kratos? Like, Dark Souls, maybe? I don't think it's a term people try to use genuinely. It's just a term when people don't like the presentation of a story. Because the lore is the story.
So you think even just the classification, like giving it a name, is almost like a way to try to segregate it. To say like, oh, it falls under this category and therefore shouldn't be used. That kind of thing. Like some people will make that argument.
Yeah, because I feel like Kratos scaling isn't lore scaling, it's just the story. They act like it's a black and white system where it's like, alright, we have the on-screen feats and we have the lore feats, but it's like, those are all just the story. Like, the lore is the information behind the on-screen feats, if we're really going to be technical, but that could just be someone speaking, next scene to explain the last scene is technically lore. Lore is just knowledge gained via studying something, which is what scaling is.
Yeah, like, I can definitely get behind that. Again, if any of you guys have seen, to anyone watching or listening, if you've seen my prediction or my reaction to this, you pretty well know my stance on lore. I do think there are some case-by-case bases. I think sometimes you gotta really make sure you know what you're talking about. But in most cases, I do think lore is fair to use, because at the end of the day, it's just another way of presenting the information. You may not like that presentation because you might not see it unfold in front of your eyes, but the way it works, especially for video game characters, some people may not like that because you play as the video game character, you can see all that stuff happening, and it doesn't really feel that powerful when you're playing it. But Death Battle doesn't look at how it feels when you're playing the game. They're looking at the character and everything that they are confirmed to be able to do. And what falls under lore is what they are confirmed to be able to do. In many ways, that's a game writer's method of telling the player or the consumer how strong a character is that you would not see, just in the gameplay alone. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. And I've seen some people use the argument that, well, if you're using lore, then that means you have to use every creator statement that's ever been said, and that obviously doesn't work because sometimes they just don't know what the hell they're talking about. And I don't really think that's a fair rebuttal because, yeah, sometimes if you just take like a creator statement out of context, then yeah, that might not really add up. But when it comes to lore, like in-game lore, that realistically has gone through so many rewrites, so many levels of revision and approval, that if it gets published within the game, then yeah, I think it's just canonically part of the game. Again, you may not like the way that it's presented, but that's just the way it is. And again, like, it seems like a lot of people were upset because only one character here benefits from lore scale, quote-unquote lore scaling, or at least benefits more than the other character, because Kratos has a lot more of that stuff than Asura, but that doesn't mean it's unfair to use. Like, no character deserves to win just because they do or do not have lore scaling. You have to look at all the facts and then come to your conclusions. You can't choose whether or not you use lore based on the characters that you're looking at. You have to make that decision first and then analyze the fights. You can't pick and choose which fights you use lore for. I also just imagine, like, you know, someone going up to a lore writer and basically being like, hey, you wrote this lore, but it doesn't count, right? Like, it's not real. A lore writer is never going to be like, oh yeah, no, I just made that up for fun. It's not really part of the game. Like, are you kidding me? Like, who would do that?
Technically, all lore is factual, because if someone's lying, then it's not lore at that point. Like, the lore is that they are lying. That would be the lore at that point.
I mean, fair.
True!
But what I more so mean is that, like, you know, something is obviously meant to be confirmed. Like, you can't use the same argument for just in-universe statements, because they might, the person who said it might be wrong, or they might be using hyperbole, you know. Obviously, you need something to back that up. But when it comes to something like lore that, for all intents and purposes, is just the facts, then that's how it is.
That's kind of why I'm now on the lore scaling is a pointless distinction camp now, because we've just been talking about semantics for the past 5 minutes as opposed to talking about the characters.
Yeah.
I think you should just approach the story or the characters as like, all right, here's the feat. What happened here? Like, you don't have to be like, all right, what's the lore versus what are we seeing? Like, that's not necessary.
There was a time way back when Death Battle would basically only use direct feats for characters, and then they kind of got more comfortable using scaling, but some people were very weirded out by that. They were like, well, hang on, like, if we didn't see the character do this, then how can we say that you know, we just know for a fact that they can do this thing that another character did? And the exact same thing is happening here. Now, basically, the whole community is on board with scaling, but now we're going from direct feats to scaling, and now it's from scaling to lore. We're just kind of moving up, you know? It's the progression of how people see versus debates. So I think there will be a time in the far future where lore is considered fair, and there's not really that much, you know, shade thrown at that. But we are kind of in the midpoint where it's like we realize, well, hang on a second, lore does change things a lot, and it may actually be valid. And I think, yeah, eventually people will come to realize that, yeah, it is just part of how people describe, you know, the media that they produce, and you just kind of have to accept that people use different methods for describing and portraying their characters.
Yeah, I will watch Death Battle Cast as like a background podcast for me.
Sure.
And it's really interesting to watch like the Q&As of after Death Battle episodes, like way back in like season 4, season 5 era, where you kind of can see the progression of how they answer these questions and how they approach scaling.
Yeah.
Like, I remember it was the Carnage versus Lucy.
I was just about to say, I was like, that reminds me of that. But anyway, go ahead, but that's crazy. We were thinking of the same thing.
Well, it's just a very, like, blatant kind of way to think about scaling. It's that one in the Ghost Rider Lobo Q&A that I think of a lot, where they go from, like, is Carnage actually light speed? Does he scale to Nova? And, like, the way that they kind of talk about it, with that episode, they were kind of like, well, does it make sense for him to be this fast? Which I kind of think is a funny logic, because he's a fictional character. How do you determine what makes sense with a fictional character?
He's literally a fucking alien symbiote bonded to his bloodstream and can go into the fucking cyberspace, kill people like he's Samara from The Ring, but the speed is what makes the least sense.
Here's the thing. Okay. This is something that I noticed. Yeah, like, and this is something I've had to, you know, remind myself of before and catch myself, you know, make sure I'm not doing this. But sometimes it does seem like if a character doesn't feel like they're this fast, then they can't be that fast. Or if they don't feel like they're this strong, then they can't be this strong. Again, I kind of feel like that applies to Kratos in this way. One of the biggest examples I remember in an actual Death Battle episode was Sanji versus Rock Lee, where a lot of people had issues with how they analyzed One Piece and the speed feats. But a lot of the complaints basically just boiled down to, oh, Sanji and Luffy don't feel like they're this fast, so they can't be that fast. Like, no, that's not how it works.
That's not how it works. That's a visual presentation thing, not a versus thing.
Okay, great.
So if we want to move on, like Santee said, we've been talking about lore for a long time. How about we start discussing some of the other stuff? So, how was that soundtrack?
It was interesting.
That was good.
I thought it was fine. I think it sounds nice. I will say, though, that it isn't the translation for the title. It's like Wrath or Rage or something, I believe. Is that right?
Didn't they already play that card with Broly versus Hulk?
Yes, they did. So they basically doing the same thing where they do a translation of that kind of word. Yeah.
It's literally just, it's basically anger again. Like, it's just Ikari, just in a different language, if I'm not mistaken. It's literally
to
just
be fair,
anger.
they are pretty similar matchups. Like, I think
Yes.
that's a matchup where
I mean, anger is key in both of them, but still,
I think
like, Wrath of the Gods was right there.
I do think the track is nice to listen to. I think it definitely leverages more of like the tragedy and emotional side of the characters rather than like the wrathful or the epic side of them, which I think some people might be like, well, then why was it called Wrath? This doesn't really feel like a wrathful track. But I still think it's nice to listen to, and I think it is representative of the characters in a way. But I could maybe see some people that would have preferred like a more bombastic, like really hard-hitting track rather than...
If you want a bombastic, like, metal track or something really intense, we got Doom Chief coming up soon.
Oh yeah, that one's gotta be that, for sure.
That's gotta be that. Come on, we got Doom in this now.
We get the nice few notes of the Halo theme at the start, and the rest is pure metal, because that's how the fight's gonna go.
I hope we get McGordon on that.
Chief's gonna get one little shot off with the Magnum, and then Doom Guy's gonna use him as a kid's party pinata. I'm sorry.
What did you think of the track Fiction? Because you brought it up. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I liked it. I liked it a lot. It wasn't, again, I did think there was gonna be some harder kind of, not metal stuff, but that more aggressive, almost like Greek stuff from the God of War. And I haven't heard the Asura's Wrath soundtrack, but I'm sure he's got plenty of aggressive stuff in there too. But I do think that with how the character's story goes, that going on the more softer side works pretty well, just because of where they are at the end.
I do think maybe it would have been nice, though, if the track had a progression like the characters' stories themselves. Like, maybe it starts off really rough and aggressive, and then it transitions more into that lighter side. Because I do agree with you that, like, from the perspective of where the characters ended up, yeah, it is very fitting, but I do think maybe there could have been some more intense elements in there. Again, maybe have a bit of a progression that mirrors the characters' progressions, but I do think that's totally fair. I'm happy that, you know, the track did that all for you, because I know for some people they didn't really like it, and I think they did expect something a little harder hitting, but I think it's okay. And generally speaking, yeah, I think the episode does a really good job of trying to be respectful to the characters. I do think, despite the flaws of the animation, I think the animation itself is respectful to the characters in what they were doing and the ways that they fight. Like, at the end, you literally have Kratos attacking a giant monster, a giant Asura. You know, that is so respectful to Kratos. Like, that's exactly, you know, what he does. There are so many moments in the animation where...
It's a good homage. Sorry, go ahead.
Homage. No, yeah, it's totally respectful to, you know, what the characters have done. It's fitting for what the characters have done, and there are so many more examples of that. But I guess part of being respectful to the characters is also being representative of how they feel in combat. And I guess for some people, the animation just didn't vibe with them perfectly. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, because when I watched the animation for the first time, to me it felt like a normal death battle animation with just a slow start and some emotional moments that we don't always get from Death Battle. Sometimes we do, but not always. But it does seem like Death Battle was trying to push the emotional moments to the forefront, you know, especially at the end. And I did really enjoy those. I enjoyed the alternate ending as well. I think some people didn't like it because I think they thought it was a little too, like, pandery to the Asura fans. But I thought it was nice to include. They didn't have to do that, you know. Animation itself takes so long. So again, to say like, oh, DevilArtemis didn't cook, like, come on, man. He made like 9 minutes of animation, actually, that they cut down to like a 6-minute thing. Like, be a little more respectful, you know.
Yeah.
I do think if they're gonna put effort into that kind of stuff, though, I think they should stick more with the alternate scenarios, like that Bowser versus Eggman had throughout the conclusion, rather than like always giving an alternate ending just because oh yeah, we love Asura. It is so clear though that they do love Asura, because again, just throughout the analysis, throughout the animation, they were trying their best. I'm not going to say they were perfect, because I'm not going to say like all the analysis portions were perfect. The point is they were respectful to the characters, and they were trying to really hammer home like, yeah, how cool Asura is, and that, you know, aside from lore or whatever, he's doing all this cool shit, and it's cool because it's cool, you know? So I appreciate that.
My perspective on how he portrayed the fight was that it was kind of like there was a lot of good and a lot of not good. Like, I feel like the fight went from like, this 30 seconds is really well made and super good, and the next 30 seconds is not that. But then the next 30 seconds is really good. It felt like a good season 9 episode. It feels a bit below the bar of the season 10 and the first 4 new episodes we've gotten, is the thing.
Well, that's exactly what I was saying, that, yeah, there are some moments of jank, there are some moments of poor pacing, but there are other moments in the animation that are literally the exact opposite. I am very appreciative of all the moments in the animation that looked good. I'm appreciative of the emotional moments they put in. The animation does feel like it had like a beginning, middle, and end. Like, it did feel more like a story than other animations. And again, I think for some people, like, I think back to stuff like Macho Man versus Kool-Aid Man, which, you know, a lot of people didn't really like because it kind of changed the death battle formula a little too much. And that's one where I can actually get behind people's frustration with that, because I do think the stuff they were trying to push forward did kind of bog down the stuff that they are good at doing, the stuff that they normally do. But there are other episodes like Martian Manhunter versus Silver Surfer, and this one, where it's clear that they're prioritizing other things. And while I do think there are some regular death battle elements that they could have done better, I'm still appreciative of the things they did differently. And again, I was definitely over-enthusiastic when I was watching this for the first time, but I'm so grateful that they want to try some new things. Even if it doesn't work all the time, sometimes the more unique stuff is really good when they do it really good. It's not good because it's unique, it's good because they know how to nail it. And sometimes it doesn't always happen, but I'm happy that they're trying.
One thing I want to say about the animation is, like, there's, of course, the planet shot, right? The planet punch shot. You know, it's kind of funny to me that I genuinely feel like this episode did the planet punch shot not as cool in comparison to Scooby versus Courage. I don't know what it was that made me feel this way, but like
the Kratos grin.
The lore man shot.
But he did the Asura thing. That was kind of cool, wasn't it?
He did
But the thing is, I don't want Kratos to do the Asura thing. I want Kratos to do the Kratos thing.
I just don't think that it hit as hard. Maybe it's because we already had that Planet Punch shot already in a prior episode.
About the Planet Punch specifically, I have like thoughts on it. I think once Destructor form Asura comes out, it's like beautifully animated. The scale is awesome. The issue is once the punch starts, Kratos isn't acting like Kratos when he reels up for the punch. He's just acting like Asura did. Like, I don't think we really ever see Kratos stance up and roar at an incoming attack like that normally. Like, that's not how he fights. I think, like, if this was supposed to be, like, a more in-character version of what Kratos would do, he would kind of brace for it. Not exactly like Asura would brace for it. He would kind of brace for it. He would kind of catch it more like Atlas, basically. It would look like he died, but then you would hear the roars. He basically like throws it off of him, kind of like what Hercules did to Wukong's staff.
Right.
And then you would actually have the cool line where he says, "Death has not earned me yet," because you kind of get the impression that almost killed him.
Right.
But here it's just like he holds it up with one hand and does like an anime shockwave punch, which Kratos never does. And it's like that. It's just, this isn't a Kratos moment. We're just like, it felt like they were doing an Asura moment, but it couldn't be Asura, so they just gave it to Kratos instead. Like, it doesn't feel right.
So a little too forced, you think, then, maybe. They should have been a little more true to Kratos. I do think, again, like, especially at the end when he's, like, running up and, like, you know, stabbing the big guy, you know, in the face or whatever, like, I think that is very true to Kratos, because we always see these, you know, huge scale enemies where he's like, you know, he has to like maneuver around them and all of that. So I think that was very cool and very true to him, but I can understand the frustration that you want him to act like Kratos the whole time. So Yeah, maybe giving him an Asura moment was a little forced, but I don't know. In the moment when I was watching it, I still thought it was fun.
That's kind of what I'm talking about, with how, like, it'll go from, like, 30 seconds of I don't like this to 30 seconds of this is pretty sweet. Like, that,
I see.
It goes from the part I don't like where he punches away the fist to, like, okay, this Kratos moment is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
This is what I'm looking for.
Okay, I can
really like
totally get
the
that.
shot where he throws the Drapnir spear, and then it opens the portals, and a crap ton of them start That was awesome.
And I remember, Santee, you were saying that, this kind of feels like a season 9 episode, which kind of ties into what I was wanting to say, is that, again, there are some people that absolutely despise this episode, and I don't know if it was because of, just high expectations for it being on, like, 2 champion events, and then Death Battle decided to do it afterwards, but, like, I've said this before, but I do think that we are kind of spoiled, and we have kind of been taking Death Battle for granted if this episode is now what is considered dog water for the show. Like, if this episode came out in, like, season 5, 6, hell, I would even go as far as, like, season 7, this would be, like, monumental. And yes, obviously you want the episodes to get better, and you don't want them to go back to being worse or anything. But I wouldn't even say that this is, like, that bad of an episode. I still think it was very entertaining. Again, you can tell that Death Battle has gotten so much better at, like, doing deep dives into the characters, making sure that they try their best to be respectful to them. And I do think there are a lot of moments in this episode where it's clear that, yes, they're going out of their way to be respectful. So I really do think we've kind of been taking Death Battle for granted, because if this is what's considered really bad, then I'm a little worried for the rest of the year. If something else is just, oh yeah, it wasn't as well animated as Kratos versus Asura, and therefore it is, like, the worst episode that's ever been made. It's like, come on, guys, like, let's calm down a little bit. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I think the overly negative reception it got was due to, like, 2 primary factors. For one, this was already, like, a really toxic debate already.
I expected that.
Like, I've been saying for years that this was gonna be the Ben versus Hal 2. And while it's not as bad, I do feel a little vindicated because my prediction was kind of right. Of all the new independent episodes, it's definitely the most toxic of them.
You think it surpasses Omnidoc and the Sun Disc?
Well, I was about to say, like,
was only bad after the fact. Asura versus Kratos was bad during, before, and after.
Badder than Joker.
What Joker toxicness? That one was fine.
Honestly, that one was surprisingly tame. Like, there were some people getting upset, but, like, compared to Omni-Man versus Bardock, the vocal outrage was not nearly as bad. But yeah, like, there's a lot of people who's like, oh, I fucking hate the Sun Disc. And I was thinking, like, yeah, that's definitely the most backlash an independent episode had gotten up until this point. But yes, I do think there's a case to be made for Kratos versus Asura now surpassing it, even if it's not for as specific of a reason. But I still think, yeah, like, a lot of people just don't like the fact that lore was used, and again, that's the stuff I expected. I expected it to be toxic for that reason. But there were also a lot of people that were just like, oh yeah, like, DevilArtemis is such a bad animator. And it's like, guys, shut the fuck up, please.
Yeah, anyone who's saying that isn't being genuine.
Animated motherfucker.
I do think it's fair to say I don't think it's as good as some other stuff DevilArtemis has made.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would say overall, like, Bardock versus Omni-Man, for example, as a piece of animation, I think is overall more consistently good than this one.
I'd agree. I'm not saying you have to like the animation. If you genuinely don't like the animation, then that's fine. I can't change your mind. But I think just saying that this episode is so bad because of your unrealistic expectations, that's another thing. Like, I don't want to put too many people on blast. I don't want to, put a blanket statement over this. But I do find that some people confuse their hopes with expectations. I think when they start to hope for something, they start to expect it. If they hope for something too much, and then if it's not in the animation, then they get mad just because it didn't meet their hopes. But I think we need to draw a bigger line between hopes and expectations. You can hope for something to be in the animation, but don't hope for it so much that if it's not there, you're gonna shit on everything in the video. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, let's take Cocaine Bear versus Beth Gator as
of course,
an example,
yes.
I need to bring that up in this episode. It's tradition.
Yes.
All right, let's pretend my name is Sakinator 3000.
Sure.
Right? And I'm really wanting Cocaine Bear versus Meth Gator to happen as an episode. Death Battle, I know you're watching this. Do my boy a favor. But like, if I'm really excited for like this one particular idea I had, or like one particular thing I want to see, like, oh, what if I want to see Cocaine Bear do a line off the crocodile's back at the start of the fight while he's doing meth, and I don't see that, I'm gonna flip the fuck out. Putting too much expectations on like what could be really good, that's just kind of setting yourself up for failure or disappointment. You're either gonna be like, okay, well, it's different, so I don't mind it, or it's like, oh, it's not what I wanted, fuck.
That's the reason why I still love Stitch versus Rocket Raccoon, you know, the episode I wanted to see the most.
Yeah.
Are there individual moments that maybe I would have liked to see? Sure. Maybe there were some things that weren't in the animation that if they were in there, maybe I would have been like, oh yeah, that's really cool to see. Like, thank you for that, Death Battle. But I'm not expecting any of that. And everything that episode did was everything that, generally speaking, I wanted it to do. So I'm able to enjoy the episode immensely for that, because it's more about the episode happening rather than, oh, I need this, I have this huge checklist. Like, no, don't go into an episode like that, or else you're gonna be disappointed. So that's why I can still enjoy episodes like that, you know?
Whenever I was commissioning my Sunset versus Kara track from Werewolf, I had a very clear image in my head, like, okay, this is how I think it's gonna sound, how I want it to sound.
Right.
And it didn't sound how I wanted it to, but what we got out of it was so good, I really don't care. And that's when I really think I realized, like, yeah, I had a cool idea, but like, Aaron was the creator, and he also had cool ideas, and he implemented them, and we got something really cool out of it that we probably wouldn't if he had done everything that what I wanted the track to do.
Another thing I want to mention about the animation is I really don't like the choreography of kind of the initial punch fight they have. I think the biggest problem is we never see the impact of their fights. Okay. We basically see the wind-up of a punch very quick, and then we see an effect happen that implies they got hit, but then we don't actually see what happens after the impact. It just kind of cuts to when they're winding up the next one. In an older fight Devil did, Kakashi versus Obi-Wan, one of the most memorable parts for me is when Kakashi disarms Obi-Wan, and then we see Kakashi just piece up Obi-Wan for like 5 seconds, and all those punches are really satisfying.
Right.
And we never get a moment like that because they never let any of the moments linger. It's like Torian's old complaints about Civil War, like, just stop cutting so much.
I get that, yeah. Like I was saying before, part of, you know, doing the characters justice is like getting the vibe from them from a fight, like trying to feel how they feel in combat. And with characters that are like this strong, you definitely want some oomph behind their attacks. With all the work that Devil put into this thing, with it being his longest animation he ever did for Death Battle, he allocated his resources and his time to other things. And some of that, like the emotional moments, I do really appreciate. But I do feel like maybe if he made the animation a little shorter, he could have polished up some of the individual attacks a little better. I guess it's like a quality versus quantity thing. Maybe we could have focused a bit more on the quality than the quantity. Would you agree with that?
That's kind of what I was thinking, yeah. Like, I think I sent y'all the storyboard, and I would argue the storyboard of their punch fight looks cooler because we linger on the punches, and it feels like we can kind of see the impact.
That's totally fair. I totally think that's a fair thing to say. And yes, there are definitely legitimate criticisms that you can throw towards this episode. And a lot of that will depend, like your perception of the episode will depend on how much do those criticisms actually mean to you. Does it ruin the experience? Again, for some people, if it does ruin the experience, I think they need to manage their expectations. But for some people, they genuinely think that it just would have been better if you focus on like the impact of the punches or how they feel while they're fighting. And again, it's hard for me to even say that all the way because I think there are some aspects of the animation that do follow those well, but not everything. And that's a totally fair thing to point out. But yeah, overall, I still enjoyed this episode. I think people that say that it's just meh or bad, like, I still don't agree with that at all. I still think it's a very well-made episode. I think it's one of those where you could argue that the analyses are better than the animation. And for some people, that's kind of unacceptable. Like, if the animation isn't perfect, then they'll just hate an episode. But as far as, like, again, the way that they're edited and the amount of respect they put towards the characters, especially Asura, like, yeah, I definitely think this is one where you could be like, the analyses were so cool, and And again, as far as the reasoning goes, I don't have an issue with it. I love the fact that they used lore as much as they do, because I do think it is fair. And the conclusion is not, like, any more flawed than, like, an average episode of Death Battle, so, like, I don't really see that as an issue either. But again, it'll depend on the consumer. Like, if you really like Kratos or if you really like Asura, there's some elements that might piss you off a little more than others. But yeah, just as far as the general production, the animation, yes, definitely could have been better. Still think it had some good elements. But the analyses, I do think, are where this episode shines, at least for me.
I personally cannot wait for the next time, though.
Oh yeah, what's the next time again?
It's Ghost Rider versus Spawn, and I cannot wait for that, because
It's gonna be so cool.
I'm very hopeful.
Ghost Rider
really
is
forward to it.
one of my favorite Marvel characters. This Johnny Blaze specifically isn't my favorite Ghost Rider. That goes to Robbie Reyes.
I had a feeling.
But I'm glad to see Ghost Rider in any capacity come back to the show, and what I'm even more excited to see is Spawn making a comeback.
Right after Kratos.
Right after Kratos.
Yeah.
That's
It makes me
crazy.
It's gonna be even funnier if, like, Spawn loses.
Oh yeah, because it just reversed the outcomes of the outcome of Kratos versus Spawn
how
twice.
turntable.
Yeah, yeah. No,
It makes me wish Kratos versus Spawn was on the rematch poll and won.
somehow.
That'd be hilarious.
So it's Kratos versus Asura, then immediately after Ghost Rider versus Spawn, and then like a few episodes later, Kratos versus Spawn.
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been great. Ghost Rider versus Spawn, one of my most wanted episodes of all time. I'm so happy that, you know, it's finally, because it's one of those where it's like, I'm happy that Death Battle is doing it this late, because it means that they can probably make it even better than if they did it earlier. But it was always one of those where it's like, how has this not happened yet? It's Ghost Rider versus Spawn. It's like one of the biggest versus matchups like ever in the comic realm. So I'm so happy they're doing it. I think it genuinely could be one of the best things we've ever seen. And yes, I'm excited to see Ghost Rider come back, but I'm even more excited for Death Battle to show how cool Spawn is to all the people that maybe don't know him that well. Because there is some debate on whether or not Spawn is as powerful as the general consciousness kind of depicts him as. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about, like, all the cool things that he's done, his accomplishments, you know, and his aura, for lack of a better word. Like, I'm so excited for Death Battle to get into all of that stuff. Because I think a lot of people know that Ghost Rider is amazing, and he is. But the true scope of how cool Spawn is, I'm excited to get to that.
So this is gonna be weird. I am so rooting for Ghost Rider because as a kid, my very first superhero movie was the first Nick Cage Ghost Rider movie, and that got me hyped. My 8-year-old self hyped as hell.
It is a really fun movie.
Ghost Rider.
That actually reminds me, on an earlier podcast episode, I think it was like the second one, Zero, I think you were actually on this one. One of the other mods was talking about how they saw the Nick Cage Ghost Rider movie in theaters when they were like 2 years old. Do you remember this, Zero?
Yeah, I remember that. I think I was there for that.
Yeah, it was the second episode. Spectral was talking about how he saw it like with his parents, or it was either like a parents or babysitter or something, but like he saw it when he was like 2. And it's like that like kind of disturbed me, and I was a little worried because I know Fiction, you just said you were 8, but I was a little worried how old you were when you saw it. But I think 8 is definitely better than 2.
Do you even have memories when you're 2?
I don't know.
At 2 years old, I think Ghost Rider would have given, like, any kid nightmares.
Yeah.
Like,
if you
not
remember.
even just Ghost Rider himself, like Blackheart.
Yeah,
Blackheart was terrifying. Honestly,
Blackheart was more terrifying than Ghost Rider.
I still love that scene where he kills off everybody in the bar. That's so cool.
Oh my god, dude, that is it's like, unironically, no pun intended, that is a cold as fuck scene.
Yeah.
And with Ghost Rider and Spawn, it's really weird because Spawn is one of those characters that's he's kind of like a shonen character that he just keeps getting stronger as the series progresses, to the point where, like, again, he's on par with Satan and God and all that. Like, it's insane. Whereas Ghost Rider is like, it's not that he gets more powerful, it's that we learn more about him, and he's just so consistently inconsistent. So it'll be fun to see how that compares to each other.
Oh yeah, it's kind of funny just in the comics. It's like, oh, is Ghost Rider getting stronger? No, he's always been.
Yeah, exactly.
Has he always been able to tangle with World War Hulk? Yes.
Yeah.
He just never had to before.
Yeah.
I mean, he is getting stronger in the sense that we would probably scale him higher now than we would 5 years ago.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. in that sense, yes, he does get stronger, but it's like with Spawn, it's more like a shonen protagonist thing where like we see him get stronger as the comics go. With Ghost Rider, it's more like, yeah, we just learn more about what he can do, and sometimes that can be frustrating from a versus debating perspective, but sometimes it can also be kind of cool. So I'm excited to see what the analyses look like just for that alone.
Johnny Blaze is continually getting upgrades, but it's not because of stuff he's doing. It's because Robbie Reyes keeps getting upgrades, like scaling to Thor and Loki, and then Johnny Blaze is like, also, I'm still relative to you, by the way. You haven't surpassed me.
Robbie took possession of a celestial body. Like, the body of a celestial.
Right. So you don't mean a moon. Like, not when most people say celestial body.
No,
you mean,
the
body of a celestial.
I do that
I'm
too.
just saying.
This was such a fun talk. Thank you guys so much for being on here. I think we've basically covered everything we wanted to. Before I do the outro, does anyone have any plugs they wanna say? Anything?
Yes. I have recently started a podcast on YouTube called the Fan Battle Cast. A lot of people have pitched matchups to the Death Battle team via the Kickstarter.
Yes.
And a lot of people are super excited about these matchups. They've been talking about it in the various Discords. And I was just really inspired by all the passion people have for these matchups. So I, with the help of a lot of people in the official Death Battle Discord, have put together a fan-made Death Battle cast.
Ooh.
We plan to go through every single matchup that we know of that's being pitched to the team and giving them their own version of a Death Battle cast. Because we were thinking, if someone's willing to support a matchup this much, we can talk about it for an hour.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So if any of you guys listening, are really into those ideas and you want to hear more about them, yeah, that's where you go for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I have a YouTube channel. I do mostly video game content over on my channel. I'll have Raptor link it in the description.
Sure.
I stream on Twitch pretty much regularly as well. And yeah, if you want to stop by and enjoy my crash outs over the littlest of shit, feel free to stop by, have some fun.
I mean, other than my YouTube channel, which I semi-regularly upload towards, I don't really have much. I just kind of hang out here in the Discord. Feel free to message me anytime. I'm always down to talk and hang out.
All right, great. So I'll link anything that needs to be linked down in the description below if you want to find these guys. And once again, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone listening. If you have any opinions or any agreements or disagreements you want to share about anything that we've said, let us know down in the comments below. We'd love to hear your feedback and everything like that. But yeah, I'm so happy to be doing the podcast again. I forgot how fun this was. So, great to be back on YouTube and all that. But yeah, I think that's all we need to say. Thank you for listening. And that is a wrap. Good night.